and welcome back to By the Way, Broadway Baptist Church's podcast ministry for our under 18 ministries as we walk through the Gospel Project, the Bible in 3 years chronologically. And, you know, walking may even be an overstatement. It feels like we are slowly crawling right now through the book of 1 Kings, but it's good. We like it. As you can tell by my voice, I'm not Justin, your typical host. My name is Jackson. I've been on the podcast before, but not in this position. I'm surrounded by others. A couple of other usuals. We have Celeste, our preschool ministry director, Lauren, our children's ministry director, and Timothy, ministry director of communications. And we are communicating to you right now, so this is his specialty.
That's right.
We are filling in for Justin as he and Jamie are taking a much-needed vacation to the land of, all I can think of is Hogwarts. Where are they right now? Universal Studios, yeah. Yes. Justin's been sending us some fun videos. He and Jamie are walking around Hogwarts and Hogsmeade and all that.
They might become part of the Avengers after all is said and done.
Mm-hmm. Wait, Avengers are there too?
Isn't it?
They're at Disney. I don't know if they're.
Are they? They're doing Disney
no.
too.
No, they're not.
They're
okay,
not.
never
Okay,
mind.
well,
I don't know my franchises.
Well, wherever they are, they're not here, and we are going to try our best to fill in for Justin. Celeste has already said she's going to bring all the jokes in his stead to give us some humor for the podcast today. Her face is telling me she doesn't agree. We'll figure it out. Somebody.
We'll try to keep you awake.
Yes,
We'll say that.
Somebody will be funny today. So, where are we in the Bible? As I already said a moment ago, we are still in 1 Kings. We've been in 1 Kings for 2 months now, but that's okay because a lot of important biblical narrative is happening here in 1 Kings. We have changed directions in terms of the kingdom of Israel. A couple weeks ago, we talked about the split of the kingdom. The kingdom that was once the mighty Israel has now been divided into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. Last week, we talked a little bit about those first kings of Israel and Judah, Jeroboam, Rehoboam, both bad, both very idolatrous kings. We talked a little bit about the idolatry of those two kingdoms and how Solomon's sin led to the sin of his son, his servant, and everything has been bad since. And it honestly continues to get worse. We're skipping over a few chapters talking about some of the other kings of Judah and Israel. Judah has a couple bad kings, but then they have some okay kings. So Judah is not all bad. Judah has some bright spots. We talk about Asa in chapter 15. Okay, he was a pretty good king. And the chapter 15, verse 14 says, "The heart of Asa was wholly true to the Lord all his days." So he followed in the way of David, and Judah did okay during that time, except the high places of the worship of idols was not torn down. And then Jehoshaphat, Asa's son, we don't talk about him until later, and I'm not sure if we'll cover him on the podcast, but Jehoshaphat was decent as well. Not tearing down all of the high places, but the Bible does say of him that he walked in all the way of Asa, his father. He did not turn aside from it, doing what was right in the sight of the Lord. And so we have some bright moments in the history of Judah. They're going to have some bad ones again. They're going to have a couple more good ones. But ultimately, Judah has fallen. And Israel, I wish we could say that Israel has not fallen, but they've fallen harder, and they have no bright spots. It is all bad from here. In chapter 16, we get the description of a few of the kings of Israel. We get Nadab, we get Baasha, we get Elah, Zimri, and Omri. And these kings, they don't get much said about them. They get maybe half to a third of a chapter. And all that's really said is they're bad. They did not follow the Lord. They led the people to not follow the Lord. And I think chapter 16, verse 26, what is said about King Omri kind of summarizes how all of these kings led. It says, "For he walked in the way of Jeroboam," the king that we talked about the last couple of weeks, "provoking the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger by their idols." So if anything can capture the landscape of the kingdom of Israel right now, it is idolatry. worship of images and statues and other things that are not the one true God of Israel. And then now we have, in our story today, we're going to discuss the next king of Israel. And maybe he'll be a little better, but no, he's not. He's not at all. He's bad. He's actually the worst. Chapter 16 says about King Ahab, and Ahab did more to provoke the Lord to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him. And so up until this point, every bad king is compared to Jeroboam. They did what Jeroboam did. He was bad. He started all the bad, and they're bad like him. Now we have Ahab, and he's the new standard of evil in the nation of Israel.
Talking about raising the bar.
Oh, he raised the, well... we want to say he lowered
really
it. Yeah, like we thought we were at rock bottom with the last kings, but Ahab has dug a hole and gone deeper. He is the worst. But he gets a lot of chapters written about him. Ahab, he doesn't get just a little paragraph to describe his life. He has quite a few chapters, and we're going to discuss some of those today in chapters 18, and the ladies may discuss a little bit of 19. Yep. But the reason for that is not because Ahab is good or he did anything good, but because God displays his power over Ahab in many ways, and mostly through this new guy that we're going to talk about today named Elijah. Elijah appears on the scene. This is the first time that he's mentioned. Elijah, the Tishbite of Tishbe. Say that 10 times fast. That'd be fun. Yeah. Elijah appears, and in his own words, he says, "It is I. Behold, Elijah is here." He says that to Obadiah and says, no need to fear. Elijah is here. And chapter 17 starts off telling us Elijah's first order of business when he walks up into the kingdom of Israel. Drought. No more rain, no more crops, no more anything. The rivers are going to dry up, and it's going to be terrible because Israel, you're terrible. So that's a great first order of business for Elijah. We get the brief story of Elijah and the Lord caring for his needs, even though Israel is starving and without water. Elijah is fed by some ravens who bring him food, and he gets to drink from the brook of water. We get a small story of him raising the dead of a widow of Zarephath. I think that's how you say it. I wish I spoke Hebrew and knew how to pronounce all these words. But
still pretty good.
Yeah, we're going to try our best. The widow of Zarephath, her son has passed away, and Elijah brings him back to life to show God's power over death. But there's another interesting thing that Elijah does for the widow. She is without food, just like the rest of Israel is. And Elijah performs a miracle of telling her to scoop flour into a jar and pour some oil into a jar, and then it doesn't run out. She has enough bread to last through this time of drought. And Elijah is through Elijah is showing his power even over this drought. We see this with Jesus later on. He raises the dead, he creates food where there is none, and God is displaying his power here. Mm-hmm. And so the widow gets unlimited bread. Now, by the way, this idea of unlimited bread, it made me think about something. I'm picturing a jar with dough in it. Okay, lately Britain has been getting into sourdough, and this is courtesy of Timothy's dad. Actually, got us into some sourdough. He gave us a starter, and that's what I'm thinking of here with this flour and oil that never runs out. It's kind of like a sourdough starter that you just keep feeding, and you can just keep using it. And that made me wonder, what is the longest lasting sourdough starter? Because you can just keep using that for a long time. You just keep scooping some out, and then you feed it some. What do you feed it, Timothy? Do you feed it yeast? Is that what you put in it? Or
sure.
I don't know what you put in it.
I don't know.
Look. Ever since Tim gave it to us, Britain has taken over, and she is doing great. I love eating the sourdough. But the oldest living sourdough
starter.
That's the oldest living starter. Okay, and living meaning like these microbes that are alive and they've been fed and taken care of. How old do y'all think it is?
I'm gonna guess like some astronomical number, like 80 years or something like
80
crazy
years?
like
Okay.
that. I don't know.
What do you think, Celeste? What do you think?
I don't know. 10 years.
10 years, Timothy?
I'm going to go 50.
50. Okay. According to Gemini, the the oldest living, and this is living, okay? Not used, so it wasn't continued to be used for bread, but the oldest living sourdough starter is 4,500 years old. An ancient Egyptian yeast that was revived back in 2020 and now it is being used again by a man named Seamus Blakely.
Well, don't buy your sourdough from Seamus Blakely.
Well, apparently the microbes keep it from growing other bacteria, and I don't know. But the longest, there's one in America that's been used its entire life. Okay, it didn't go through a season of not being used, and it's been used in San Francisco in the Boudin Bakery since 1849.
Wowzers!
Yeah, and so
crazy.
Sourdough's legit. Hopefully, we can pass down the sourdough that we have to our great grandkids. Yes, and just keep using it, and we are going to beat this ancient Egyptian sourdough.
It's the gift that keeps on giving,
I
Clark.
sure hope Jesus comes back before then, but we're gonna give it a try.
My goodness.
Yeah. So, yes, that's Elijah. He provides unlimited bread, probably not sourdough. I think this is a little bit more miraculous than the natural continuation of sourdough starter. But now we come to chapter 18. And this is where the Lord begins to show his power over King Ahab, the baddest of the bad. Elijah shows up, and in a sense, he's the baddest. Not in the bad way, but in the good bad way. He is about to show off God's power against King Ahab and the prophets of Baal. And so chapter 18, Ahab hears from Obadiah that Elijah is back in town, and he's been looking for Elijah. Jezebel, Ahab's wife, who is also evil, I think probably worse than Ahab, they've both been looking for Elijah all over the place to get rid of him. And now he comes back, bold, confident, ready to let the Lord work. And Ahab comes, finds Elijah. And Elijah, he doesn't see Ahab coming and hide. He's not worried. He tells Ahab, "Hey, go get your people together. We're about to have a showdown." He calls a meeting, and Ahab listens. Elijah speaks, and he's like, "I'm not messing around with this guy." And they gather all of the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah, and they gather on Mount Carmel, where Elijah has called them to meet. And Elijah, one little prophet of God, comes to face off, and this is like WWE SmackDown on steroids. We've got 2 bulls, we've got 2 altars, we've got 12 jars of water, and we have one God. This isn't really a SmackDown showdown fight because it's kind of one-sided. There's only one God here, and that is what is displayed in the story. So as the story goes, as chapter 18 tells us, the prophets of Baal try their hardest. They prepare their sacrifice, and Elijah says, whoever's God is real will bring fire down and consume this sacrifice. And the prophets of Baal are trying. They're dancing all around. They begin to harm themselves to try to get their God to listen. Elijah starts mocking Baal, their God, obviously Elijah knows he's not real, but he's playing into it a little bit. He's like, well, sorry guys, I guess that didn't work out. And then he prays to his God. But before that, he brings 4 jars of water and has people pour it onto his sacrifice just to make sure that this thing is not going to catch fire by accident. And he brings 4 jars of water, 12 times, pours it all over the sacrifice until there is water filling a trench around the sacrifice to protect it, just in case something sparks this thing on accident, just so that no one thinks that this is by Elijah's doing. Elijah prays to the Lord, God, on your own behalf, would you come and display your glory here? Prove to these people that you alone are God and that I'm your prophet and you have sent me. And God answers it. It says fire comes down from heaven and it turns everything to dust. The fire even licks up all of the water that was present, and immediately everyone falls on their face because God has revealed himself. And they say, O Lord, O Lord, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. You know, they haven't been saying this for a while. This is a big turning point because for the longest time, the people of Israel have been led astray by their evil kings. And now we get to the point where God is revealing himself and giving no doubt whatsoever that he is the one true God. The idols of Baal and Asherah have been proven to be lifeless and unable to do anything. I love how chapter 18 puts it as midday passes and the prophets of Baal and Asherah have been dancing around and trying their hardest to get their God to listen. The paragraph ends by saying, "And no one answered. No one paid attention." Well, obviously, because there was no one there. God alone is real, and God alone is the Lord. Jehovah is God, and he is God over the idols of Baal and Asherah, and still is today. And so that is chapter 18. That is our story. Chapter 19, Lauren and Celeste, as we discuss the points, you can fill in the gaps with what y'all will be talking about from that chapter. But with that being said, how are we going to present this amazing story, this familiar story, to our ministries? And so, Celeste, let's start with you. How are we going to teach this to the preschoolers?
Yeah, so for our preschoolers, our main story point that we're going to be focusing on this week is that God showed he is the one true God. So we're going to be doing this by focusing on the main part of this in chapter 18, this contest, if you will, between this false god and the true God. And we'll be going over that with the kids and just really, talking over and over again with them how God shows that he is the one true God, that there are no other gods. We have a big picture question for them for this unit that ties into this really well for them, and that is, how many gods are there? There is one true God. So that is going to also play a really big part in this lesson for them as well. We're going to be talking really briefly on 19. The main focus of that is really just talking with them about how Elijah afterwards ran off to be safe. God told him to go to the mountain and then later called him in a whisper and telling him he still had work to do, and that he would go and help. And Elijah did what God had told him. So that's what we're going to be focusing on this week.
Amen. Getting me fired up. I love that story. Lauren, what about you? How are we going to present this to our kids' ministry?
Yeah, so the main point for the kids ministry is that God proved he is the one true God by answering Elijah's prayers. And so the main point of that, the story that we're all thinking of is when he prayed on top of Mount Carmel with the prophet of Baal's present, and the Lord brought fire down from heaven to consume his sacrifice, to beat these prophets, to beat Baal, to beat Ahab. But there's another part of the story, like Celeste just briefly mentioned, about how after that showdown in chapter 18 and chapter 19, Jezebel, Ahab's lovely wife, if she could be any worse than Ahab, she might be.
I believe she is, yeah.
So she says, "I am going to kill you, Elijah." And Elijah goes from this bold and confident prophet in chapter 18 to one who is cowering in chapter 19.
She must have been really scary.
His life. Yeah, and so we find him in the wilderness. He's hiding. He's feeling pretty sorry for himself. He's crying and praying to God once again. "I'm the only prophet left. No one's out here with me." And so God answers his prayer once again, but this time it's not in a mighty fire like we saw in chapter 18. No. It's in a still, soft whisper in chapter 19. And so we're just going to talk to our kids about how, regardless of how God answers you, whether it be this mighty, dramatic answer or a very quiet answer to call you to do what you're supposed to do, in both ways, God is working. God's speaking. He's defending his holiness. He's defending his people. And it all points to the fact that he is the one true God, and there are no other gods but him. So that's what we're talking about in kid ministry.
Yep. Yeah, Jezebel, I don't know what it was about her, but it seems that, Elijah can walk right up to the king of Israel, Ahab, and just tell him, hey, bro, go get your people. Like, we're about to show down. And he's not scared at all. All of these, there are, what's 850 prophets of Baal, and he's not scared of any of them. He disposes of them, makes light work of them, and then Jezebel says a word, and he's scared for his life. It makes me wonder about her. I wonder if she was like, a sorcerer or like some kind of like big strong warrior. I don't know. Maybe she's just really ugly or something. I'm not sure. Well, Timothy, you have removed yourself from the youth ministry officially, but you still love those kids, and you still are with us in spirit. So
absolutely,
how are we going to present this to our middle school and high schoolers?
Yeah, so in our youth Sunday school classes, we'll be looking at that main portion, the showdown section of chapter 18. And the main idea that we want to communicate to our students is that idols are powerless before the one true God. So along the same lines as our preschool and kids, but specifically looking at how idols, first of all, are worthless. The idols in this case, the worship of Baal, there's no power, there's no value or worth there. Only Yahweh is worthy of worship and praise. And then secondly, we'll see that God alone is sovereign, that only He has power, only He has control. One of the ironies of the story is that Baal supposedly had this power, this connection to nature and to weather and the ability to provide rain, yet it's a drought. And even still, these people are going to Baal, like you said earlier, they're dancing and cutting themselves and doing all kinds of crazy things, trying to get Baal to light this sacrifice on fire, but yet it's only the one true God that has the power and the ability to do that. And so then we'll help the students apply that by seeing that we must choose between worship of the only real God or the worthless objects of worship that the world has to offer. So we'll see what that looks like in our context today.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's great. Yeah, the prevailing theme here is that Yahweh alone is God, Jehovah of Israel, the same God that we worship today. He is still the one and only God, and we are going to be teaching that to all of our ministries, from preschool to kids to youth. But we also want to be sure that we're teaching these things to our families. The reason that we are doing this podcast is to help families implement what the kids are learning in their Sunday school classes into their family worship, into their daily walk and their daily discussions and the discipleship that is happening in the home. And that is where we believe the true discipleship is happening. And so let's look at some questions to give to our families for how we can take this home. So as usual, we ask the question, what do we learn about God or man from this passage?
Well, it shows us that God is the one true God, and He will do the miraculous to prove that to His stubborn people, and He will show His power and His glory. It shows that men are easy to wander and worship other gods that they want, even though we see those gods are not able to provide or protect as God can. But it just shows the silliness and fickleness of man's desires and heart.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. And this reminds me of a discussion that we had with our D group last night as we're going through the Compelling Community. And we got to the chapter on praying as a community. And when we look at what prayer is, when we look at what prayer should be biblically, we should pray in accordance with the will of God. And what we see in Scripture as God is revealing His will is that He is zealous for His own glory. He is going to do what glorifies Him, and He is going to do what is best to sanctify His people. And I think that we get a great example of that here in this story. And something that we learn about man is that when man aligns his prayers and his desires with the desires of God, we see great things happen. We see God display His glory in a special way. Elijah, when he is praying, he prays according to the glory of God. He says, God, none of these men here fear you. Display yourself in such a way that they have to recognize that you are the only God, and solidify me as the one that you have sent, so that when I preach, they will listen and obey you. It's not about Elijah. It's not about making him look good. He's aligning his desires and his prayers with the glory of God, because God promises to act on his own behalf. He has promised to make his glory known in the world. And when we pray along those lines, God answers prayers. And we see that play out here in the story. Okay, what about this? How do we see the reality of God's power win out? Okay, in the showdown that is still happening today, how do we see God's power win out over the worthless idols of man today? And to get you thinking, I'm picturing like, what happens today that is like this scenario where God shows his power and man's what they have propped up has been proven worthless? Or earlier in the Bible, you remember when the Ark of God's covenant was brought into the temple of the false god, and he just kept tipping over the idol until, the arms fell off and he just kept falling on his face because he was lifeless. He was powerless before the one true real God. What are some ways you can think theologically or practically, what are some ways that this happens in our world today?
Well, not to hog the mic, but I'll share a story that someone shared just this last week in Bible study. I won't say who, but they were talking about how often in their life they ran to the idol of financial stability. And they just looked for, just provision through having all their finances in order. And oftentimes when they were more immature, that would mean them not giving to the church. And it just seemed that they still just didn't have enough means and money to make things work. And she said they became convicted. They started giving to the church, and lo and behold, what would happen? But they would find themselves stable financially, and they were doing better than what they were before they were giving to God. And so that's just one example of how when we submit those idols to God and give where he has called us to, that he takes care, he provides, and he proves that he is God. A historical example would be just the prayers of George Mueller. If you've ever looked at his ministry and how God just provided for him over and over and over again. And he didn't put his hope in these worldly goods and things for his ministry. He just prayed that the Lord would answer, and he did. And he showed up over and over again and proved that he was the God who would provide and care for his people. So those are just two examples.
Yeah, absolutely. And the idols of today, whenever we talk about idols, we know that they don't look the same today as they used to. Typically in popular culture, we don't have the small statues that the family is bowing down to in their homes at night. It's more structures or systems, or like you said, finances, things like that people tend to put all their eggs in that basket. And then God shows his power when he shows that to fail and forces us to trust in him instead. One example that happened last Thursday. Okay, I'm watching the Cowboys and Eagles game, and I'm a Cowboys fan. And this is typically when I don't know why. Maybe because we talked a lot about idols in youth ministry, and like I was really into sports at that time, and so sports were always singled out as this is the idol of our people, and it really is. I mean, you look at it when you see this game happening, and like these people are they've painted themselves all up, and they've given all their money to go sit front row at this game.
It's a lot like worship, yeah.
Oh, it's seriously, it looks like a giant worship service, and they watch these barbaric men run into each other all over the field, and it's just a weird thing. But it has become so propped up as like people are like so into, especially the Cowboys and Eagles, they're rivals, and people are just putting all of their eggs in this basket. Like, if the Cowboys win, then my life's going to be okay. And that's what they're putting it all. And then right after halftime, okay, it's a tight game. Nobody even scored the rest of the game, and it's real tight, head to head. I'm even excited. I'm getting into it, and lo and behold, lightning strikes. and the game is postponed until well into the night when the lightning goes away. And all the players are like, well, let's go inside where it's safe. And they just, everybody stops playing. Everybody that's watching the game goes, gets underneath the bleachers or whatever, whatever you do when there's lightning, and the game is paused. And it just made me stop and think. It was like, because I turn off the TV and, well, guess it's time to go to bed. And that was it. And it's like so much is being put into this one thing. And people, put their hope in this one thing. And then this was literally an act of God. He struck lightning, and the game has to pause. And everybody goes to where it's safe, and there's nothing they can do. And it just is a small and honestly kind of silly because of how silly the idol is. But God does that all the time in the world when people put their hope in a sports team or in finances or in security, whatever it is. And then God acts and shows, hey, your stronghold that you've built up here, what you've put your hope in, has no power on me, the one who actually created the world, the one who actually upholds the world. And so God is still zealous for his glory and is still acting on his own behalf here in the world today. Okay, let's move on. Here's a question, and hopefully, it's not too wordy, but so think about Elijah when he comes onto the scene. We talked about his coming before Ahab. Think chapter 18 Elijah, not chapter 19 scared Elijah. Is Elijah's confidence before Ahab, before the prophets of Baal, is it a foolish, prideful confidence, or is it reasonable? Where is that confidence coming from? And then that'll be a pretty quick answer. But then what should give us that same confidence in confronting the idols of our society today?
I've been waiting for this one.
Yeah,
it's good. I thought about, as soon as I read through this passage, I also thought about our conversation in our discipleship group last night, reading through the compelling community about corporate prayer and God's people gathering together to pray. And Well, first of all, let me answer the question. Is his confidence before Ahab and the prophets foolish or prideful? Well, I would say no. It was rooted in God's character and God's power and authority. And so I would say that it was right and it was accurate. But to dig a little bit deeper, the connection that I saw, that chapter in the book, it made a point that as God's people, we do not have to be God's defense attorneys. Or to put it another way, we don't have to hedge God's bets for him. When we pray, we can pray bold prayers that seem like crazy things to ask for. Yeah. Like we see here in the case of Elijah, because like you've said already, Jackson, God loves to defend his glory. God loves to reveal his power. And so we should not shy away from praying things because we think, oh, that's going to be embarrassing if God doesn't come through. Yeah. Now, don't be mistaken. The answer might not always be what you want it to be.
Yeah, fire might not always come down.
Fire might not always come down. A lot of times God's going to answer either in a different way than you expected. The answer might simply be no. It might be later. But the point is that we should not shy away from praying bold prayers, assuming that those prayers are not just for us or for things that we want. Like, God, I pray for a red Ferrari. Well, okay, you can pray that, but
God has a lot bigger things that he's working out.
But when we're talking about things about God, would you show your goodness and would you defend your glory in this way? When our prayers, when that's our attitude, we should pray bold prayers with confidence, knowing that God is able. And so we don't need to be afraid to pray those things, thinking like, well, it's going to make God look bad if he doesn't answer this prayer. That's the least of your concerns. God can defend himself. What we're called to do is to be faithful.
Absolutely.
And to bring our requests like that before him.
Yeah, Elijah's confidence is a lot different than a previous story that we've talked about. Think about a Samson. He at a lot of times had a prideful confidence, a sinful confidence in his own flesh, in his own strength to do what he wanted to do, to accomplish his own goals. Elijah was confident because he knew he had no other purpose in life than to be used of God to display his glory. And he knew God was going to do that. And so, of course, there's nothing to fear. It's like oh gosh, I can't remember who it is now, but there's a missionary who, maybe it was Jonathan Edwards or George Whitefield, who said, "I'm immortal until God takes me home." There is nothing that can happen to me here on earth that God does not want to happen. When he's ready to take me home, he will. Until then, I'm untouchable. And so that's the type of confidence that Elijah had, and it was rooted in God's work, God's power for his own glory. So, to wrap it up, how does this narrative, because it does, how does it point to Christ? Where is Jesus in this, and how is it moving the narrative along to get to Jesus?
Well, I love a good book recommendation.
There you go.
And this Sunday, we're actually going to be reading it in the kids' Sunday school class. But there's this series, it's illustrated Bible stories. It's called Tales, Tales, Tales That Tell the Truth. And one of the books in their series is called The God Contest. And it's about this incident on Mount Carmel with the prophets of Baal. And it's a really great illustrated version of the story. The kids find it really engaging, but they make a really interesting comparison to Christ in it and draw it forward. And I think they did a great job of it, of how, just like we see in Elijah's day, how there is this contest between who is truly God. We see the same thing when Jesus shows up. And he even says multiple times, like, okay, we're going to have a God contest. You're going to see if I really am God. And one of the ways that he does that is he says, you may kill me. I may, as he says in John 2, you can destroy this temple, but in 3 days it will rise again, talking about his body. And so he's saying, like, this is the ultimate God contest right here. I'm going to prove that I'm God. And so he goes to the cross, he dies, and for 3 days, all of the people, all of those prophets of Baal, quote unquote, Satan and his demons, they're all celebrating, thinking they have won the God contest. But in 3 days, we see Jesus rise again. And he's like, nope, I'm the winner. I won the God contest. I am Yahweh. And so that's what it's pointing us to.
Yeah.
And there's lots of other incidences. I mean, you think of like Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Yeah. Other instances throughout the Old Testament that God is willing to prove himself as the one true God over and over and over again, ultimately leading to Jesus.
Preach. That was awesome. Man, getting
Good
like
stuff.
goosebumps thinking about that. Yeah, and so yes, we see Jesus ultimately, he fulfills this God contest and shows God's glory and his prevalence, his preeminence over the idols, the strongholds of not only man but the spiritual forces of darkness in Satan and his demons. Absolutely. But we also see, looking at the biblical narrative as the story is moving along, we're at this point where we think God's chosen people, Israel, are a mess. The idols everywhere, bad kings, bad leadership. The people want to be like the world. The people want the idols of the world. This just seems completely hopeless. But God has promised to preserve his people. And God has promised to preserve his people until he brings the Messiah. And I think about chapter 19. Now, this is not something that we discussed in depth, but in that discussion, Lauren, that you were talking about between God and Elijah on the mountain, God promises Elijah, go back to Ahab, go back to Jezebel, continue preaching, continue doing what I've called you to do. In verse 18 of chapter 19, he says, he talks about, how he's going to bring judgment. There's going to be destruction of evil. Yet, in verse 18, yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. There will be a remnant. God will preserve a people for himself that have not followed the way of the world, that have not followed the way of Jeroboam and Ahab and loved the idols of the world, and will remain true to the one true God. And he will preserve that remnant until Christ comes up from the remnant one day when we get to the New Testament. And it will be glorious. It will be awesome. But God is preserving his people for his own glory until then. So that's all, folks. Hopefully you have not fallen asleep without Justin and his bubbly self here. But hopefully we got along okay. I think we did. I think we did okay. But parents, Sunday school teachers, just fanatics of the show, be thinking about these things as you are going on a walk, as you are cooking some 1,000-year-old sourdough, as you are in a rain delay or lightning delay at whatever sporting event you are at. Have these conversations with your kids, with your friends, with whoever else you're talking to. Have these conversations. Glorify the Lord who acts for his own glory, and do that, by the way.